It's time for the Longines Chronicle, a television journal of the important issues of the hour, brought to you every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. A presentation of the Longines Whitnor Watch Company, maker of Longines, the world's most honored watch, and Whitnor, distinguished companion to the world honored. Good evening, this is Frank Knight. Our co-editors for this edition of the Longines Chronicle. From the CBS News staff, Larry Lasser and Bill Shadell. Our distinguished guest for this evening is Lord Strauss, chairman of the Fair Campaign Practice.
A long time ago, as far back as I remember anyway, there was hope throughout the country that the campaigns would be conducted on a basis of fair play, without personal vilification and abuse. In fact, a committee was formed, which our guest heads, that got pledges from the candidates, I understand, that they would adhere to a proper conduct. Now, Mrs. Strauss, what has happened to those pledges of fair play, of honesty, and decency?
I think we had a very percentage sign those pledges, considering it the first time that this happened, and up till just recently, they did very well in living up.
In other words, you think that there haven't been... Well, if there were any violations, which side do you think they were on?
There have been too many, because I wouldn't like any violations at all. I think that that kind of mudslinging is not wise, and I think come election day that the voters will think.
Well, in other words, you feel that it's possible that these violations will boomerang on a candidate?
Well, I do indeed. I have real faith in the people in this country. I don't think they like that kind of mudslinging, and I think that they show it in their vote. Well, I think they have in the past. I have a real belief that most people want higher standards, and this is a way of giving them an opportunity of expressing what they want. They never sat down and drew them up themselves. This code that our committee has presented, I think, puts into words what a lot of people have wanted and had in mind.
Strauss, is there any way of policing this code?
No, when the committee decided to make this code available, we decided that we could not police, but that we would leave it up to the press, radio, and TV, and to the people themselves to do the policing. And I think that in our is the right way of doing it.
Well, Ms. Strauss, you acknowledge that there have been violations of the code, honesty, and fair play, and decency. Now, would you pinpoint the blame at the candidates or on the national leadership?
Well, I don't think there's any one place it comes from. I think that many people can contribute to it, and I think that it often is a move of desperation. I think that's why there's been more of it at the end of the campaign. I think the fact that some of these things that have been said at the very end, when there really wasn't time to prove whether they were so or not. And I think that's the kind of thing that the voters will learn to recognize if they haven't already, and realize that kind of attack is not a justified one, and they don't want to do it. And on election day, they'll make it known.
Mr. Strauss, when you have a chance to evaluate this campaign, when you go at another such campaign, your own fair practices.
Well, we hope to.
You're not discouraged?
Oh, we're not discouraged a bit, and we hope that the editors will help us evaluate. We have a questionnaire we want to send out to the editors, asking them what they think about it, and asking suggestions how it might be made more effective other years.
Ms. Strauss, is it possible that the public themselves are guilty of violating your pledges by exaggerated bias, by indulging in what have been called whispering campaigns, which is not due to the candidates or the national leadership?
Well, I think generally that it was started by somebody who was deeply involved in a campaign.
Do you think there is an initiating force in any of these campaigns of vilification and personal abuse, even whispering campaigns?
Oh, I think that there is the original force, and then I think that it is often taken up by the people, but I don't think very often the people themselves have started it going. And I think that unfortunately, the press and the people and others contribute towards it. But again, I think if we call it to their attention and show them how it's to their own disadvantage to have that kind of a thing happen, that a large majority of the people will not do it. I think it's an awfully small number who do the name calling and who like that kind of thing, and I think those of us who don't have to get up and say we don't, and say it in no uncertain terms, and that's what this Fair Campaign Practices Committee is trying to do.
Ms. Strauss, would there be any, would it be practical to try and get some federal legislation or perhaps a resolution passed by the Congress endorsing this code?
Yes, actually that was what was originally thought of when the subcommittee drew up what it was basically the same code that we are using, the subcommittee on privileges and elections. But they didn't put it into legislation, and so we, just a group of citizens, picked it up and said, let's do it by the force of public opinion. To my mind, I rather like it when public opinion does something and just speaks up and says, we want the best of our candidates and we'll demand it of them.
Strauss, now, is the raising of false and misleading issues one of the dynamics of politics, or can politics be conducted on purely intellectual lines?
I think it can be done on intellectual, if you want, or the facts of the situation, because I think this name-calling and mudslinging gets away from the real issues. And to my mind, you can do a wonderful educational job in politics during a campaign and give the people a real basis for making honest decisions.
As a practical politician, can you appeal to the people through their minds or through their emotions? Isn't it necessary to go to their emotions in order to get them to vote?
Yes, but we have good emotions as well as bad, and I'd appeal to the good emotions when you're making the emotional appeal. I think it's a combination of intellectual and emotional, but let's have it on the higher emotional appeal and not the baser ones.
In other words, you think you can make intellectual or mental issues into emotional ones by is that good politics?
I think we've got to make it good politics, and I think it is increasingly good politics.
You just stated before that some of the candidates were guilty of introducing issues that could not be proved against their opponents at the very tail end of the campaign. Well, isn't that good politics if they go into the election day without the other side being able to disprove the charges that are made against them?
No, I hope it's going to be shown that it's very bad politics, because I hope that the people will recognize that it is name-calling, and that if those were real suspicions, they should have been brought out earlier.
Does your committee have any plans for trying to evaluate a candidate losing because of unfair practices?
Well, we shall do it for our own satisfaction to see the effectiveness of it, but we, as a committee, are not doing any evaluating that we would make public as to whether a candidate had lived up to it or not. That would put us on the spot.
It'd be a pretty good lesson, though, wouldn't it, for some politician?
Yes, it would. We hope that the people themselves, the voters, on election day are going to do that type of evaluation for us, and that's much better to give the majority that opportunity instead of just a small committee.
Well, Mr. Strauss, speaking of evaluation, do you think there should be a limit on how far back an opponent goes in using facts which are not, or issues which are not related to the issues of the moment, to smear an opponent?
Well, I think
should there be a time limit?
No, I think that pertinent facts should be brought out, but I don't think there's a time limit on pertinent ones, but I think that the crux of the situation is what is pertinent.
Well, why haven't, if I may ask Mrs. Strauss, why haven't women done more to clean up politics? After all, that was one of the reasons they gave for getting the franchise when they first got women's suffrage. And since there are more women than men, why haven't they done more to wipe out, by the force of their vote, these candidates who violate the pledges of fair play and decency?
That's one of the reasons that was given for giving women the vote. Actually, I'll go back to my own great-grandmother, who was one of the first people to work for the vote, and her basis, she was a very strong anti-slavery person, was that women have a contribution to make, and the vote is the crux of being able to make it. And I I will say that I do think that women do have somewhat higher moral standards that can be applied, but after all, you know the old story, if women were all angels, the men would have a very dull life. And I think that the people that thought that the whole political scene was going to be made over just because women were given the vote were being rather unrealistic at that point.
Do you feel that our campaigns have been cleaned up in the last 20 years?
Oh, I do. I think that they are on a better plane, but not as good as they should be.
Well, Ms. Strauss, do you think actually, you've seen a few campaigns, I suppose.
Yes,
do you think
quite a
that
few.
election campaigns are getting better or worse
I think they're getting better.
with the present campaign that has taken place in the past few days?
No, what I'm saying is I think that there is more honesty in campaigns now than there used to be. And I'm not pleased until they're entirely cleaned up, until this code of fair campaign practices is entirely lived up to. But I think this is just another step that will help improve them.
In other words, do you think the force of public opinion as harnessed by the women in the League of Voters and this committee for fair play is gaining more and more power in the actual elections?
Yes, I think it is. I think that, well, we know that there's a very considerable number of independent voters, and even within the party, independents. And that's a whole subject in itself, how much you should vote as a party matter. But I think this degree of independence means that people are thinking on their own and making their own decisions. And I think that kind of decisions will mean that the party will have to work with higher standards, just as I think the League of Women Voters trains people to go into their party and be more than yes men, to really make a contribution of higher standards to both political parties.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Strauss. It's always a pleasure to have a woman of your high principles come before our cameras.
The opinions expressed on the Longines Chronoscope were those of the speakers. The editorial board for this edition of the Longines Chronoscope was Larry Lasser and Bill Shadell. Our distinguished guest was Anna Lord Strauss, chairman of the Fair Campaign Practices Committee.